Matthew, so on the screen is the agenda, starting with welcome and introductions. Did you want to go around the room and on Teams?
I won't go round the room, but I will, as we're doing this through the town hall function, ask people to introduce themselves as and when they speak. So for those who haven't realised, I'm Matthew Barber, the Police and Crime Commissioner. We have apologies from Jason Hogg, Chief Constable. He is represented today by Ben Snuggs, the Deputy Chief. I don't think we have any other apologies to note, so we will move straight on to the minutes and actions from the previous meeting. Have you got any issues with the accuracy of the minutes, those who were there last time? No, that's good. We have a number of actions which are helpfully summarised, most of which complete the ongoing one was to look at the rank status of various things in the performance pack and to do some deep dive as part of what we're doing on today's agenda, and we'll continue to do those as we go through. We had an item on the summer plan and reporting back to the Home Office. I wrote back to the Policing Minister to say that we wouldn't be sending in all of the detailed reports the Home Office were wanting, because I was quite comfortable as Police and Crime Commissioner. The TVP were doing a lot of what was normally done over the summer period, doing some very good work as well. But we know there'll be a similar push from the Home Office over the winter period. My approach will be the same. And there were some additional actions on toolkits, which I think have all been. Yep. Thank you very much. In which case, we get on to the finance updates and delegated decisions under the scheme delegation. Martin, I think you're online with us first. Could you introduce yourself and then take us through the first of the finance items you got, please?
Well, this morning, everyone. Martin Thornley. I'm Matthew's Chief Finance Officer. So this is just to report formally, as we're required to do, the Treasury statement for the last quarter, which is showing much better interest receipts than we had forecast. That's the key message from this. This is due to interest rates this year having held up more than the forecasts we had a year ago when we set the budget. I'm happy to take any questions.
No questions from me. Thank you, Martin. We've seen the papers already. It puts us in a good position, but still obviously leaves some uncertainty for the future, depending on what rates do. So I'll note that report. Thank you, Martin. And I think, Linda, we're with you for the next one for the medium-term capital plan.
Thank you, Matthew. Linda Walters, Director of Finance. So we've got the medium-term capital plan and the medium-term financial plan this morning to go through. We've obviously been through some of the main assumptions previously. So this is really just sort of to touch base as to where we are pending the information we're expecting just before Christmas, which will obviously put us in a much better position going forward. So just quickly going through the capital then and looking at the key messages. In relation to the capital, what we're really focusing on is actually making sure we've got that longer term view, because of the funding pressures that we know we don't get separate funding for capital, so we do need to make provision within our capital plan, within our revenue plan for our capital expenditure. And that's very much what we're looking at in relation to the capital. So we've got £500 million of capital schemes over the next 11 years, potentially slightly outside of that. And when we come on to the revenue, we have made financial provision within that revenue budget. That doesn't necessarily mean to say these schemes are approved, but in principle, that's what we're looking at doing. Clearly, between now and when we actually get to the sort of the delivery stage of the schemes, there is a process of business case approval, funding approval, which we go through before we actually sign off those schemes to actually say they will be going ahead. So we have just taken the existing capital programme and updated it for everything we know. So just moving on to sort of the main changes. A couple of items we have added, the carbon reduction budget we have added. This is where in discussions we've had that actually we want to be in a position that when we are looking at doing major works to a building or significant work to a new building, we can actually evaluate the benefits or not of, for example, solar panels or other carbon reduction initiatives to see if over the longer term they will deliver value for money, they will deliver those long-term savings, and where if we can invest money and they will deliver savings, then we have this separate budget we can use. So we're looking at it separately to say refurbishing Milton Keynes, and we're actually looking at that carbon as a separate initiative to see if it will deliver the savings going forward.
I think that's important because it does balance the not an income generated, the savings over the long term against that capital, whereas a lot of the other building programs we've got don't actually deliver a return other than keeping the buildings in a suitable fashion. So.
And then the other schemes on there which we've added, the data centre was already in there, but it was only in there as the initial feasibility stage. And then 2 items from the Oxfordshire estate strategy, which we know from the meeting last week. We are doing a significant amount of work on that Oxfordshire estate strategy. So they may change, but as I said, it's just for that financial planning to make sure that we're not going to reach a stage where we haven't got financial provision for the schemes. And then the delay and moving on that additional year because of the size of that programme at 500 million, that actually a 12-month further on is 14 million of extra inflation. Now, partly that's because construction inflation is so high. That is impacting it, but that does just show that when some of these schemes, for very good reasons, but do get slipped, actually the inflation does have a big impact going forward.
And that's why I recognise that this is not a simple thing to do, and I bang on about it at the estates group as well, that wherever possible we need to bring a lot of these programmes forward quicker, even if that actually means additional borrowing, because we haven't got capital now. We're better off borrowing up front than we are simply waiting until it fits in with the capital programme, given the levels of inflation.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, construction inflation is still being particularly high, which is impacting us. So then just moving on, the next sort of few slides, just the first one, that pie chart, just emphasises the point I made that actually just because schemes are in here does not mean they're approved. But it is just for that funding. And then we go on to sort of the breakdown of that 500 million over the next sort of 10 years, taking us forward. And then we just touch on the funding for the capital programme, which I've mentioned really. It hasn't changed. Clearly, capital receipts are still in there, but they are declining. Reserves is one of our primary sources, but clearly the reserves come from actually the revenue budget. And obviously our direct revenue funding, because the only capital grant we get is actually not for ourselves, it's for CT. We do have to fund everything, which does mean with the scale of that 500 million, we are anticipating and planning for increased borrowing, as you mentioned, Matthew. And we've discussed previously sort of the assumptions underlying that it really is only for those big new property schemes where we know that the building itself will last for that sort of 25 years that we're estimating the borrowing over. But those revenue figures, the loan repayments and the interest is within the revenue budget going forward.
I mean, they may make a difference by a couple of percentage points, but some of the conversations we had last week at the Strategic Estates Group around Central Oxfordshire Estate may well impact on that. Hopefully, something slightly positively. Actually, I think there's some.
If we can bring
direct travel there
forward,
might help.
Yeah, that will definitely help. So yes, this, I won't want to say this is a worst case situation because we know
it could always be worse.
It could always be worse, and we know what inflation's like, and we know things do tend to slip. Yeah. So hopefully it's a sensible forecast.
Yeah.
And then we just go on to the assumptions, which I think we've probably covered. I don't think there's anything there particularly new. I mean, we have, you know, things like end user device replacement schemes. We are continuing. We have at the moment, I suppose the one in that I've not touched on is the EV vehicles, because we are obviously assuming we will be buying EV vehicles, which are more expensive up front. At the moment, we've made the assumption that the additional electric cost is an exact replica for the reduction in the amount of fuel we spend. So the two negate off. In theory, the electric cost should be less, but we haven't factored that in at this stage.
Factoring the actual costs of the infrastructure around.
We've got some. I suspect we haven't got enough. I think we've got 8 million in there for infrastructure costs. It depends how much we have to put all our own infrastructure in and how much we can sort of use the
Public sector.
But yeah, the other public. Hopefully we can, but it's everybody's going to want to be charging at the same time, so it may not be as easy as we hope it would be. And then if we move on to the risks and issues, I think that's again pretty much touched. Inflation's probably our highest, followed by the electric vehicles. I mean, the one right at the bottom, decarbonising our buildings by 2050. Yes, at some point we are going to have to start looking at that. But I don't think at the moment we've got enough information coming out of government or the industry to actually know how that will progress. So that's a future risk rather, I think, than a current risk. So that was very, very quick run through, but
okay, no, that's fine on the capital. Martin, was there anything you wanted to raise? I know you've seen the papers in advance, but
no, the lot of uncertainty about the borrowing, I think, and in terms of when we would do that and how much that would cost. But going out in terms of going out to the market to borrow the funds, we've got probably up to about 100 million that we would be able to borrow internally by using our own kind of reserves and free cash flow, which means in the sort of term of this plan, the need for external borrowing is likely to be limited. But what's really important about this plan is it looks to the longer term, so we don't land our sort of notional successors with a huge liability. So I think a sort of realistic and prudent approach.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. In which case, moving on to the revenue, please, Linda.
thank you. So again, I'll sort of take us through the highlights of the revenue, and I think we thought we would probably be in a better position than we were, because we obviously had the comprehensive spending review, which obviously made the assumption that the council tax would go up by £14. It also made what sounded like a really good announcement that we were going to get a real term increase in funding of 1.7%. Unfortunately, as we know, when we dig into that and look at the inflation factors the government have used compared to our pay awards, there's a small, quite a reasonable difference between the two, which means that it's not a 1.7% real terms increase, and we're probably much closer to being cash flat when you take into account the inflation rates we are going to have to, the pay awards which we have had and which we are expecting, and clearly inflation is still higher than the government is expecting going forward. So and
I always remind you, the £14 is an assumption by government, and I entirely accept that the numbers announced in the CSR are based on PCC's increasing council tax by 14%, but I've still got to justify to the good people of Thames Valley that it is worth increasing their council tax by £14.
Yeah, definitely. As we know, the big problem with the comprehensive spending review, apart from the assumption that is going to increase our funding, is in relation to the neighbourhood policing fund, and actually what are they going to expect us to do, and how many additional officers. They have made it quite clear they want the government's mandate of 13,000 extra officers, PCSOs and specials stands. They have made it quite clear that the CSR pot, that is the only pot there is for policing, so there's no additional funding for anything else. What we don't know is that big question about how many neighbourhood policing officers, we will be required. So we made assumptions in our figures based on our share in relation to the size of Thames Valley, but clearly until we get to Christmas, we're probably not going to know the answer to that. What we do know is, and what is visible in our medium-term financial plan, is the Home Office drive for efficiencies and actually saying those efficiencies in future will fund those additional officers. That starts to really show up in 28, 29 and 29, 30, where actually the money coming from government, the increase does not match the increase we're assuming we will need to fund those additional police officers. So that expectation that forces will really be able to identify big efficiencies in those latter years is showing in the figures, and clearly depending what comes out of the Home Office as to whether or not that is achievable. So just in relation to the assumptions then, we've assumed the existing 6 million we get from Neighbourhood Policing Fund will continue. We've assumed we will be required to provide those extra neighbourhood policing officers, and it will be within the CSR figures. As we've said, we're assuming everything else stays the same, and we have followed through on that assumption of the government that the precept rise will be £14. In relation to pay awards, this is always our biggest risk. At the moment, for next year, next September, we've assumed 3% and then 2.5.
And what's the basis of that 3% assumption? It's higher than what we had last year and lower than the reality, and so it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it's definitely higher than the government are assuming. I think they're on about 1.7 by next year for inflation, which is obviously what they've allowed in their spending review. But given we had 4.2 this year and given inflation still at 3.8, that sort of seems a reasonable assumption to make going forward at this stage. But that clearly, as we know, has such a big impact on our budget.
And it is one of those which, I will certainly have a view on as we come setting the budget as to where we, our risk appetite for that, because it much plays into the negotiations with the Home Office, because there is an argument that says actually, if we have all been at 3 or 3.5% rather than 2%, would the Home Office even have given us the difference, or would we have been close enough for the Home Office to say, oh, actually, well, it's not that big a gap, you can fund it yourselves. So actually making sure that we create a gap, as long as that's justifiable, has some point. And I think the fact if the Home Office estimates are at 1.7 or 1.9, that for me is a starting point of in terms of, well, we'll listen to what government is telling us it should be. Because I think that strengthens hand in policing, but I do recognise we would need to consider contingency in that case.
So yeah, I'm sure continue those conversations.
We've also then go to the next line. General inflation will drop to 2% in future years. That also looks optimistic.
It does. I mean, clearly, we put this in sort of a couple of months ago, and since then, inflation has been stubbornly high and is not going in the direction we hoped. So yes, we probably need to consider. I mean, the general inflation does not impact many of our budget lines. Where we've got specific contracts, then we do put the inflation in, which is built into those contracts. Although quite a few of them are linked to CPI. So potentially, we do need to revisit that, I think, going forward.
I just think those two particular assumptions are worth us keeping a very close eye on over the next couple of months ahead of setting the budget, because half a percentage change here or there can either
on the pay, it makes a huge difference.
It can make or break whether we balance things or not. It can be both ways depending on which way we go. Okay, thank you.
So then the next slide just sets out that 4 years, and obviously the last 29-30 is the new year, which we've added on. And those figures at the bottom just sort of demonstrate what I was outlining before, that as the government are providing in their grants more cash next year, and then that declines, the amount of increase declines. So in 29-30, they're not covering the inflation, let alone the additional officers, which we've put in. So that then comes through to the sort of bottom figures. And then the next slide just goes through the changes we've put in sort of this budget round. And there's sort of a line in the middle there, which is the additional neighbourhood policing officers, which at the moment we've assumed are 74. Now for next year, we're assuming half year on the basis that we'll end this year pretty much where we should do in relation to growth. So the growth next year will be even throughout the year. So basically we'll only be paying for 6 months. And then that means in the 29-30, you've sort of got the final 6 months. And in the middle there, you've got the full 12 months going forward, which would then take us roughly to our share of their mandated additional officers. I don't think there's anything particularly we haven't discussed at various other times in there.
Just a small one, if you could, because we'll be discussing some of the numbers a little bit later on. You've got the removal of the PCSO vacancy. Out of it's only 100,000, but that's just for the 2 years.
It's coming. It's taking it back down. So because it's cumulative, it will then be removing the vacancy factor because we've taken down the establishment. So from last year we reduced the establishment, and then we're just balancing the vacancy factor with what's actually happening, which is why it's quite a small figure. We're just tweaking the vacancy factors reflecting the actual position we're seeing.
So it's why the impact of it is removed for 28-29, so it just returns to the norm. Okay.
We have at the moment, I mean, the big thing on this only includes the absolute committed growth. So where we have had changes in maternity pay, legal costs, those items we know we have to provide for legally, that is the only growth which is in these figures at the moment. CCMT did go through the bids at the last meeting and prioritise them, and we are having the joint meeting later this week when we are going to have another look at the joint bids. Now some of those bids are more along the lines of investor save, so that quite a few of them, as always, are technology, but they do deliver savings going forward. So some of them we will be looking to fund from reserves as one-off expenditure, but I'm pleased to say we have got a much smaller level of bids than we have had in the past. And it does reflect the financial position we're in, and that we are actually continuing to look for those savings going forward. And it's about reprioritising rather than about keep asking for more growth going forward. So I suppose that quite nicely takes us on to the savings. I think we've looked at this slide quite a few times in the past. I'm very pleased to say that in relation to the current year, we have delivered all those savings for the current year, and actually for next year we've already got 1.5 identified from the savings delivery board, which will help us because, as we know, the enabling service is probably going to slip to the right slightly. So for this year and next year, I'm very confident we have those savings, and then going forward we have already identified the areas we're looking at. So we do have a good history on delivering those savings, so I'm quite confident that will be difficult but will not cause us problems going forward. So then just moving on to our establishments, and primarily the police officer has got the extra line for those additional neighbourhood grant estimates that we're including, and then from the council, the 31 underneath is the balance of the additional council tax officers we've had in previous years, netted off for the reductions we've taken from the force review savings. And then just below that, when we look at the police staff, that's where you're seeing the reductions from the efficiency savings coming through in relation to our establishment as well going forward.
Okay, and we will, I know we've looked at some of the forecasts later on when we get on to monitoring about neighbourhoods, but the forecast at the moment is to over-recruit by the end of this financial year on the assumption, the hope that there might be additional grant available from the Home Office. Now, that's obviously not shown in these figures, because your assumptions so far have been to the level of Home Office funded, but we would presumably just be taking those, providing there is grant, so there should be a negligible net impact to retaining those officers. We would just see an increase in strength and no additional financial costs in the first year at least.
Yes.
Obviously, there's a longer term impact to the fact we've got more officers, and what happens when the neighbourhood policing guarantee money runs out.
It depends how they fund those additional officers this year, if they're going to fund them this year and next year, or will they then count as part of our target for next year? But yeah, with that, it shouldn't have any impact on the bottom line in the short term.
In theory. Good. Well, we wait to hear from them in due course and see how others perform.
So in relation to the risks and issues, I think we obviously touched on grant funding, CSR. Forensics inflation is actually looking slightly better. We are having another look at the new contract, but we don't think that will now go up. So I'm hoping that risk can actually come out. And the other one is not actually, it's on the next page. Payroll we've talked about. Maintenance and repairs we obviously spoke about in the SEG meeting. That is something we do still need to have a look at in relation to property expenditure. There is still the potential we will need to put more money in for the maintenance of our buildings in the short term.
Yeah.
Then interest receipts is actually a positive story in the short term. As we said, the interest rates are staying higher than we expected at the moment, so that is a positive interest because of our cash position. I've mentioned the fact that there is no additional growth in the budget, and then in relation to the pension schemes going forward, we have had the local government pension valuation come in. We've got a meeting with Martin later this week, I think. And that's actually looking positive. So I don't think that's going to cause us a problem on the budget. The police, I've not heard anything about the police officer pension revaluation. So I don't think that will be through in time for this budget round. I think there'll be a future budget round. But yes, the local government pension scheme is looking positive. So then just to finish off, we put in the two slides from MPCC, which just show us in relation to all, probably not quite all 43 forces, but where we are in relation to how big our savings requirement is over the next 4 years compared to other forces. And as you can see, we're definitely in the better half of forces in relation to the size of savings we have to make going forward. And then the slide after that takes into account our sort of savings requirement, our reserves position against sort of that financial certainty and resilience going forward. And again, we're quite clearly in the green quartile for our financial planning and the position we're in. So again, hopefully that's reassuring.
I'm equally just as interested about the 6 forces that seemingly have very small levels of growth available within their budget that haven't got savings targets.
Oh, the ones actually
the green
below the line. Yes. Unfortunately, I do only have where we sit. I don't have everywhere else.
Interesting conversation to.
But it would be nice to. I think I
can imagine. I can get to. I think a fair number of them are.
Yeah.
Given the vagaries of the funding formula.
Yes.
And those forces, perhaps like Durham and Northumberland, that don't have the levels of demand and do seem to get significant levels of funding. With £14 assumption on council tax, someone that has a very low level of council tax at the moment, they should do very well. Right, sorry, reserves position.
I was going to say, I mean, that's really just for reference, you know. We have got a small amount in the IMP reserve, but clearly we're all very aware that that is for spending only once. But clearly, if we do have some good initiatives, we would be putting those before you to utilise that fund to hopefully to deliver performance or efficiency savings going into the future.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Then we've got the delegated authorities. Any particular ones you want to flag on there?
No, I mean, this is 6 months, which is why it's a slightly longer list than normal. Because I'm not sure if you missed the meeting, or I'm not sure if you've ended up.
I think we had an earlier meeting. It was cancelled earlier.
So it's ended up being 6 months, but there's nothing out of the ordinary there. It is, and the non-procurement delegated, although the numbers look high, they're not when you take into account the six months. So that was, I'll just take questions unless there's anything.
No, nothing in particular for me on there. Thank you. Lovely. I think that's it for the finance stuff. Then you're obviously more than welcome to stay. But I certainly feel obliged. We won't be upset if you.
Matthew, may I ask, would you like the agenda still to be on the screen, or would you prefer to see the participants?
I think we probably take it off the screen now. I think a retaking part has got the slides, unless when we get there, you want to obviously go through them. So we're going to go into the sort of slightly deeper dive stuff that we've had, rather than going through the full data pack that we had in previous meetings. So the first element of this is with you, Mike, on resourcing, particularly around neighbourhood policing. Follows on quite nicely from some of that conversation actually about where we are in terms of overall establishments.
So Matthew, we've got Kat here as well today, and I thought we'd start with Kat, as Kat can give you that overarching summary of our resourcing picture, going into the neighbourhood kind of profile, and then Mike is from the neighbourhood command to give you kind of the detail of a bit more what we're doing with those resources, and then I'll take it on to the response profile. It's okay.
Lovely. Very happy.
You mentioned the PG slide. Is that what I'm going through now?
So yeah, I mean, it might be worth actually. It's the one that I sent you on email, but it might be worth actually, Rachel, if we can have the slides up for Kat to talk to. Is that okay? It's the PG slides, Kat.
It's the PG
slides. Familiar with,
so
do
you want me to share it, or somebody should?
If it is up there, you'll be able to see it's the usual profile that we've got.
Right, is that right? That's great. Thank you. I thought we were going through a different slide, Matthew, but that's fine. I will cover it. First day back from 2 weeks leave, so just be aware of that. That's absolutely fine. So where are we? If I talk you through, would it be useful for you to talk through the slide start?
I can do that. That's fine. Yeah. So
and I'll come into part of it.
So really, the piece that Kat will speak to a bit more fully is the slides 4 through to 6, which is our retention work to make sure that these numbers stay healthy. I'll give a quick summary of this. So this first slide. Oh, sorry, Rachel, you stay with me.
Page 4. Hold on, sorry.
Apologies. Thank you.
Go.
Thank you. This first slide gives you the overall profile of our recruitment pipeline, the balance within that. The specials, I want to kind of note within there, and we look at special constable hours worked because we've been under establishment with our specials, and we know why that profile is. The one that we want to really track is making sure we get the best out of our specials that we have here, and generating more hours focused on that community policing work. So you can see there over time, we've grown the number of hours that our specials are working and contributing quite significantly. We had 1 month in August where that dropped a little, but from June onwards, without that exception, we've had a significant number more hours, especially within that June profile. The next slide, Rachel, this shows our
just on kind of while we're on specials. So I think it's a really good approach to look at hours work. I know that wasn't how we started looking at it. We were looking at establishment. I think hours work, particularly for specials, is a really relevant point. And I notice that above the number of officers coming through in the recruitment pipeline is also increasing, and the vacancies are coming down.
Yeah.
But does anybody know near the top of their heads our establishment for specials at the moment. Where are we in? Because I think this is a very good way of looking at it, but I also wouldn't want us to lose sight of the intention is to grow the size of the special constabulary. I don't want to just rest on our laurels and say, well, we'll squeeze a little bit more out of the ones we've got and lose sight of actually we will do well by recruiting more. I mean, the desire in an ideal world would be to get to about 10%, which would be 500 specials to 5,000 regular officers. We are clearly a long way off that, but that's where I'd like us to get to over time.
We can find the number out if we haven't got it to hand.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
you don't
not-
have that number to hand, but
That's all right.
no, I can find that out as well.
Thank you.
So the next slide, Rachel, looks at the neighbour guarantee and how we are tracking against the expectations that we've got to meet that growth target. You can see there we've been tracking above that growth of 68 significantly over time. And Kat, we've been on track for that, don't we? There's no
Yeah,
concerns
absolutely.
on that front.
We are completely on track for that. So at this time, we would be able to deliver probably about 20 more than the 68 that we need to provide. That allows us to do two things: gives us that bit of wiggle room if we need to as we move kind of close towards the end of the year, but also allows us to potentially fulfil the 10 additional ones that were requested. Obviously, we've said that we can do those 10 at the moment. We haven't had confirmation, no forces have from the Home Office yet whether they want the additional 10.
Yeah.
If that's the case, we can we're absolutely planning to be able to do that. What we are also really mindful of is not to come in 20 over if that's then going to be used as our baseline to then deliver further targets further on. So we're really mindful of that very sweet spot between making sure we will deliver the 68 and there won't be any gaps on that. We could deliver the additional 10, but equally we wouldn't go beyond that if we needed to. So we're managing that really closely on a month-to-month basis. So I can reassure you on that.
And then the next few slides are the work that we've been doing to try and reduce the attrition, specifically of our officer profile. This profile, the attrition via resignations, was the profile that we identified as one that we need to improve. Nationally, we were towards the bottom of the pile in terms of our attrition rate. We wanted to make sure that we had a focus on that in our strategic planning this year. So that is the work that Kat's been on. Hopefully those slides will be far more familiar for Kat for these next two. So I'll pass over to Kat for those.
So this was something that was delivered to Force Performance Group probably in the last couple of weeks. This was a kind of an ability to have a state of the nation on where we are currently with our retention plans. And overall, the guiding principle really is that we're in a really improved picture from where we were from when HMIC came in previously and when they identified that we were kind of really at the bottom of that pack, as it were. What we've shown, certainly the work that somebody from Matty's team has done, looking at a really in-depth analysis of the data from our retention and exit what do they call it? Exit interviews and things like that, apologies, was allowed us to really dig into real detail around this. So first of all, what you can see is that not only did we reduce our total number of leavers by 392, that was down 18% from that 23-24 figure, but what's really key is that resignation point, and that resignation of a reduction of 24% was really ideal, moving from that previous year to this one. We reduced the number of transfers to other forces, which was really excellent, but the ideal area here is the resignation rate, and that having changed from 6.3% down to 4.7%.
May I ask for the transfers, Frank? I mean, very, very good result in getting those down, completely agree. Do we know, I don't need the numbers, but do you have a feel in terms of where those transfers were to? Because we sort of get caught in the middle, don't we, of people going to the Met because there's more money, but they really like it because it's the Met, or going to Devon and Cornwall and Northamptonshire for quiet life, even though the pay is about the same, just a slightly cheaper place to live. Do we know which direction people are moving in, those that are still moving?
Your description is exactly right. Always has been thus, and that is exactly the scenario that we have. It really is a combination of those two moves. What you tend to also find is that people who transfer to the Met quite regularly come back.
Mm-hmm.
We have that happening very often. Generally people who are moving for family reasons down to kind of the south coast or even up to the Lake Districts. We've had quite a number of people going towards the Lake Districts recently, some really good people. Other forces in those areas have identified the benefit of taking somebody who's already very well trained. I had a FIM that went off to Yorkshire, I think it was, and moved straight in for a FIM position up there. So they are realising the benefits of taking somebody with specific skill sets and moving them for better family quality time. So those will always be the struggles for us to be able to reduce from that. However, I'm also aware that we've got a number of forces recently who have had to stop recruitment. So it's a very positive picture for us, very selfishly, that because of the financial position, thank you, that other people have been in previously, that they're currently in, they are seeing that they have to limit their recruitment. So they're not necessarily stopping it entirely, which means that we'll have a knock-on effect that people who want to join will come to us instead, because we are very open to applications currently. So that is positive. The rate of probationers leaving, as you can see, has also declined. That was one of our particular areas of concern and has been one of our strategic risks and issues. Obviously, we have the strategic risk around retention generally, but one of the issues being specifically for student officers. We've done a significant amount of work in this space, and I'm sure that you've been aware of some of the things that we brought in, primarily the police officer interview by senior officers. There was a whole change to the way that we recruited officers to ensure that we weren't just recruiting anybody, so that we were able to ensure that they had the correct directions and the correct kind of ideals that they wanted to join our force, but also that they had the understanding of what they're kind of letting themselves in for, so that they're not going to be kind of leaving without actually giving it the benefit of being able to stay. So that's been a large piece of work that's been done in that area. Some of this work then went into real detail, looking at some of these who's leaving and why they're leaving. We know that the most common time that people are leaving is between that 1 and 2 year point, which is why the significant amount of work is being done in this space and continues to be done to ensure that we're trying to reduce that significantly. However, again, positively, we've seen that there's been a greater reduction in females leaving than males. Which I think the narrative always suggested otherwise. We've also seen a smaller percentage of resignations are female than male. And again, I think people want to have the narrative that that's not the case, but it is. We've also seen a greater reduction in our ethnically diverse officers resigning. However, the percentage is still higher than the percentage of workforce that we have, which obviously brings us significant concern, and obviously is a place where we're identifying some of our efforts moving forward.
I thought it may not be relevant, but I thought it was interesting, at least looking back a couple of slides. You don't need to look back a couple of slides for the purpose of this, but about those establishment figures, that actually the specials were bang on in terms of representation of ethnic diversity across what's now we're talking about a really small sample set because they are a small sample. But it's just interesting that whilst we're still notably quite a long, making good progress, but notably a long way off. That specials are bang on, and there's a little bit. I do wonder. Specials have often been a bit of a try before you buy, haven't they? For a lot of people, not necessarily saying we would encourage, but because it'd be nicer just to train them once and have them in. But actually, so I wonder if there is a point about are people trying and they're finding they don't want it, and then we've got to. There might be an issue there about how comfortable people do feel in the organisation, or is it the start of an opportunity to encourage people to come in through that route because they can?
I think specials fall into two camps. It's a bit like the previous question, actually. They fall into two camps. One is they already have a highly paid job that they really don't particularly enjoy, but it pays a lot of money. They want to do something else. They've always wanted to join the police, and they do the specials as something to kind of fulfil that need, that want. The other side is those that are looking for something to maybe get into later on the line. I actually think that's a smaller percentage, certainly from my own knowledge from previous life. I think the try before you buy tend to be the PCSO or detention officers, that type of thing, trying to get into TVP and then moving on forward. But I don't doubt it's a space that we could potentially move into. I tend to find the majority of them get paid far too much to want to join the police, sadly. But staying with that diversity issue, another element I did want to mention is we do have an improved picture in relation to our applicants at the moment. So a year's worth of data of live applications. So it's a bit difficult to try and understand it. A year's worth of data up to September 24 only had 28% were minority ethnic or any other white background. So together. The year's worth of data up to this year, this September, it's 31%. So there's a real clear movement towards the number of people who are happy to apply for us from those minority ethnic and any other white background. And interestingly, again, female percentages have gone from 37% to 40%. So in that year move, we've moved kind of 3% on both of those metrics over those 2 years, and that's on live applications coming through, which that's the start of the story, isn't it? And what you're seeing here is kind of towards the end of the story, but it's really essential that we're prioritising our time in both elements to be able to kind of bring out those things. But why people are leaving, I think because we've done a significant amount of work on not only our attraction piece, the recruitment angle, making sure that people are aware of why they're joining. Because one of the things that was originally thought was that people didn't know what to expect, and when they came in, they were shocked at, I don't know, paperwork or the long hours or missing Christmas, and they didn't want to go. But what's really clear from this data pack was that it's the kind of work-life balance, the welfare, the well-being, and their demand, and the wanting to be able to do a really good piece of work for the public, feeling really dedicated towards it, but feeling they're not able to do it because potentially they didn't have enough time to do it. They were being moved from grade 1 to grade 1, and that feeling of that high workload, that burnout feeling, being one of the main drivers of them being able to then think about leaving. It isn't paid remuneration, which we've always known for a long time. People don't stay or even leave for the money. It is that ability to not deliver what they want to be delivering. We've got a number of departmental insights from this piece of analysis that we did. We've been able to...
So just to thought on that, Kat, in terms of got 28% the work-life balance and well-being bit. How I imagine you've got lots of data beneath that. I'm just wondering how we separate out, because there are the bits that I think people just need to live with. It's easy for me to say because I don't have to live with it. But missing Christmas. Sorry, someone's got to police us at Christmas. Hope you don't have to do it every year, but that's part of the life, isn't it? Shift work, those things you can't do anything about. I'm going from job to job to job. I don't feel supported by my line manager. It's a common part of policing. I don't think it should necessarily be a normal part of policing, i.e. in an ideal world, if we had a little bit more resource, if we could change some of the paperwork, all those sorts of things, that what incrementally we want to make the job a bit better. So how do we separate out the stuff that you can't do anything about? Yes, you're going to see some very unpleasant things. You're going to have people being very unpleasant to you, and you're going to have to work some long hours, and you're going to be late home. Can't do much about that. Separate from, actually, the paperwork's dreadful, and that there is a huge amount of demand and you haven't got time to do this. We can't fix those things overnight, but they are the things that we all do seek to try and change, aren't they? Why we introduce Pronto? Because it speeds up some of the paperwork. Yes, that makes the organisation more efficient, but hopefully it's a bit better for frontline officers as well. Do we get a feel of what proportion of that is fixable, at least in the long term, even if we can't do anything about it now?
So you're right, the data we've got is vast, and we were able to, so as a result of HMIC, we were able to put in the number of exits, kind of the strategy around getting information, not just from the person themselves, but from their line manager, from the SMT, and that allowed us to gather up all this enormous amount of information. We've got some work ongoing at the moment to allow us to get exactly those types of insights in a far better way, in a reportable way, in a monthly version, so we can identify which areas and what is the key points to actually be what now. There's no point having this data, but they won't actually be able to kind of know what to do with it. There are ways that we can pull it out. It isn't clear at the moment because in our haste to get those exit interviews out when we first did it, they're probably not as well written as we want them to be, and we're doing quite a lot of work to potentially adapt them so that we can do exactly that and pull those elements out, and that's our work ongoing with Matty's team at the moment. However, I would say that what is really clear in that data, and we've gone through it in a lot of detail, is their support from their first and second line managers is really clearly there. So they do say very positively that I'm not leaving because I didn't get supported by my sergeant or my inspector. They are saying the absolute opposite. They were giving me loads of support. They were really helping me. They were really helpful. They physically mentioned one-to-ones and docket checks and the benefit of them and how worthwhile it was, which is really excellent. And you can see over the year's worth of data the change from the previous year to this year, and saying how beneficial those aspects are. They are mostly saying it's to do with their work-life balance and the demand. So unfortunately, they are can't change anything about they work weekends and nights. Can change something in relation to potentially demand and how it's policed. So
I think there's two positive things there. As Kat said, we're working on the structures of the survey so we can unpick these things in a quicker and more elegant way when the feedback comes back. But on the front of the one-to-ones, I think that's a really good example of TVP moving into a space that we know was a problem, and we wanted to try and put some different structure there for officers to feel that support. So the fact that we're getting that feedback from our exit interviews, I think is really brilliant, and that is an example where we can get ahead of some of the themes that come through. And the other element is that expectation settings. You've spoken about the working at Christmases, the night shifts, all of those sorts of things. That again, Kat and team and Mike Levenberg have poured a lot of work into that expectation setting at the front end, which again, those sorts of things come out in the probationer leavers profile because they get into the job and they realise all of a sudden, actually, this is not what I was expecting. So we've done a lot of work in that space, and we can try and give them that expectation. So I think that those things that we know we can make some change around, or at least set expectations if we're not going to change leave to work at Christmas, I think we're leaning into that space, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting actually, this piece of analysis, the difference between when the force started investing in the need for one-to-ones, and obviously I lived through it as well, you can see that replicated really clearly in this data, which is really excellent because it shows that kind of response to it. So we are already working with some of the other departmental insights that we found. I've got a briefing to Berks West this month around kind of what is potentially going on in that area, or is it just because they were one of the last LCUs to go live, and actually to try and unpick and pull apart some of these things, because it's very easy to think that one thing there's a reason for something else, and there's kind of correlation, not causation.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's another, understand the data obviously really important. I think that the longer term things that operationally are making a difference for our colleagues, of course, we knew sort of 18 months ago, 2 years ago, HMI said that the force, and particularly response colleagues, were experiencing overwhelm in terms of their caseloads, in terms of the job element. You know, we know now with the implementation of the assessment investigation unit and the caseloads that we do monitor very closely for our frontline officers, that is not the case now. They have many fewer cases to manage, and understandably so. So again, we can evidence that sort of traction over time. So, you know, again, we're doing some of that. I think, you know, we can come on to it a bit later on as well, but the kind of the use of technology increasingly helping reduce some of the sort of mundane process aspects of lots of the different roles across the organisation, not just those for frontline cops, but in our MASHs, for example, multi-agency safeguarding hubs and the like, is really bearing fruit. So again, freeing people up to do the things that they should be doing, and also taking away those restrictions, which in the round may be part of a contributory factor on leading to do something else.
I think you're right. I think there is some good objective evidence that some of those demand pressures have been reduced as the size of the force has grown and processes changed. Because it doesn't mean they're not there. Yeah. And if you are new in service and you've been in the organisation for 18 months and you've got 30 cases you're dealing with, the fact that we can say, well, 3 years ago you would have had 50 cases, doesn't help. They weren't doing the job. They weren't doing the job then. So. Yeah, no, but that's what I do absolutely accept the point about process. The other thing which I think is interesting from my perspective in terms of the wider resource management is where you've got those areas like Berkshire West where you've got an LCU which has got a higher resignation rate. How does that then play onto performance? Probably particularly on neighbourhood, when we got to your bit, Mike. I don't know how many of those are from neighbourhood, obviously, but I think neighbourhood is where you want some consistency. It's not just about a body that's turned up at the start of the shift. It's about someone who actually knows their patch really well. And managing that, if you've got a particular pocket within the force which is struggling, how that clearly can be managed on a day-to-day basis by tasking, but it's about long-term impact, isn't it? You're moving people, abstracting them from their traditional roles to go and fill a gap, and that's going to have an impact on performance.
Yes. Interestingly, Berkshire West solved crime for the last full calendar month was the highest in the force.
Very good.
And that's why some of that nuance is so important for us to be able to do, which is why we're going to have a better way of being able to report through this and actually be able to pull it apart more detailed. Two more things I just wanted to say. We are, although we are still quite low down in the number of our retention rate and our attrition kind of nationally, we are the 10th most improved reduction in our retention rate. So I know what that sounds like, but I'm trying to be where it is definitely progress. We're definitely heading in the right direction. And if I just throw some numbers at you to kind of show you where we are doing quite well, but also where we need to manage expectations around the current strategic plan of being able to have a 10% reduction in resignations. So just looking at resignations now, in 23-24, we were having 26 per calendar month resignations. We went down to 20 per calendar month. 24-25. Okay, so 1 year later, we reduced it. The problem is we then have a strategic plan reduction of 10%, which means that we'd have to bring that down to 18 per month. We're currently sitting at around 21-22, which is still really good and really positive, but it does mean that it will be incredibly difficult for us to achieve that because we made such great strides forwards in that 24-25 picture. So I think it's important to kind of be aware of that.
And I guess it's one of those things that ultimately the strategic plan is for Jason himself to look at how you do that. I guess the challenge is percentages on small numbers. When we're talking about responses to 100,000 101 calls we get in a year, percentages are a really useful metric. Actually, if you've got the levels of resignations down to that particular point now, even if it's I'm not taking your side of this necessarily, even if it's still a stretch target you can't achieve, it might be that actually the strategic plan needs to say the target is 15, or it's an absolute number, or it's a reduction of a number, because the percentages you'll get to a level where 1 percentage point or two, it's less. You're talking about less than a whole person, if you like.
No, it's a very fair reflection, Matty. We chat these through a lot, don't we? At the start of the year, and yet, this is something that you just can't get much better at. And we are still not where we need to be when you look nationally. So we've made great strides, which is fabulous, and yet there's more to do. And you speak to Nikki and Kat, and there's a whole raft of other things that we will be putting in place to really help bear down on that, because it doesn't serve anybody's purpose, does it? To bring the wrong people in, no. Not for any of us financially, or for them or for us. So
yeah, and I think those two profiles of looking at it are really important. I think that's reflective of how 2P go about our aims and our targets. So that target is a 10% reduction in that resignation profile over the entire year. What Kat's talking about is how we look at that month on month and understand what that means in real person terms. So I think holding those two things in balance is totally okay. The other thing I will say around setting our aims for the start of the strategic year, there are always elements within that we learn from year on year, and we always try and set those aims at a level at which we feel is stretching, but also we are confident that we can try and achieve as well. And that balance you don't always get right. It's more of an art than it is a science in that regard. There's a lot of science that goes into it, but in terms of getting that spot on, I think we should expect a strategic plan that never gets all of those exactly spot on, because otherwise we're probably setting
it's too easy to go.
Yes, exactly.
Well. And then I will come on to that when we get onto the 999 forward. I think that's as well.
I think it's also important to remember we would never want a 0% reduction of resignations. We never want a 0%. We don't want nobody to resign. I also chair every single Reg 13 for the force, which means that people sit before me and I suggest that I will be recommending for dismissal, at which point they're able to resign, at which point you will definitely want me to make that decision and ask them to resign. And quite often I do, and I feel really confident when they are putting forward their resignation that all of us are in a better position for them not to be police officers moving forward for a variety of reasons that they sit before me. So I think we need to also be mindful of that, and certainly the work I'm doing with Matty is to try and pull apart things like that so we can have real confidence and say, well, okay, we've had 10 this month or 10 over the last 3 months, actually 8 of those I'm very confident we really shouldn't have in our force. So it's understanding the data behind it that's really important.
It's been not a top reason, so it doesn't flag in any of these, but within those resignations we've just looked at, obviously they will include those, should we call them disciplinary regulations? They're probably not recorded that way because they had voluntarily resigned before they've been found guilty of doing anything, but presumably we're obviously capturing that.
We are absolutely capturing.
Any ideas sort of roughly in terms of proportion of those resignations?
Probably.
We could guess. We could take
find that out. We could find that out. I'd be absolutely guessing. I'd
Be pretty low.
It would be fairly low.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
spend something like that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. I can tell you how many people resigned since I started in April. So I know that. And the final thing I wanted to say was in relation to our applications, I've obviously already mentioned kind of our live applications and how there's been some improvements there. Applications nationally have decreased around police officer recruitment. And we've seen that with us as well. However, we still do have a sustained recruitment pipeline, so it is more challenging. We have less applications than we have done previously. However, what we've also looked at and seen really clearly in the last month or so is that reduced pipeline is allowing us to then have an increased percentage of people successful in joining us, in that from what we can see at the moment, we are recruiting a better quality of candidate who want to be with us for the right reasons and will then remain with us.
So those efforts to be a bit more realistic in some of the advertising to really get people to understand what the job is before they actually stick their application in is.
And you can see it really paying dividends. So previously, over the last 2 years, we've needed about 70 applications a month to allow us to then translate that into about 37 that actually start with us a month on average. However, what we're seeing, that percentage has definitely decreased, but we know that the people who are sitting before us now are people that have got a higher percentage of pass rates. We're now seeing a reduction in the kind of exit from the early stages. We have a reduction in the number of people sitting for us in the Reg 13, and all of that is because of the investment we're putting at that early stage around attraction and recruitment side of things.
Good.
Oh, and I guess finally, I'd say we've got a really clear gold, silver and bronze structure that sits around retention. Mike Lovenberg has the gold, I have the silver. We both have gold and silver plans with really clear actions and activity that sits behind all of those. Which is what you can see part of that there. Happy to answer any other questions.
No, that is really helpful. Thank you very much. Really useful insight. Much appreciated. Mike, back to you. Then for the neighbourhood elements of that, if you can.
Yeah, I suppose just tailing on what the boss has said, I think the numbers are definitely making a difference on the ground. The increase in officer numbers, the focus, and the real push to try and reduce abstractions on our neighbourhood staff is making a difference. We are hearing much more positive things from officers locally on neighbourhood, that they are now given the time and have the time to go and do that kind of meaningful engagement, problem solving work and the kind of more proactive activity, which I think they all wanted to do. Certainly if you look at our retail response, I think we're making really good progress around our retail and our increases in outcomes. And that's because we have more officers and more time to do it.
Sorry, just coming on that abstraction profile as well. So that's a piece of work we're doing alongside our IT function, our resourcing function, and then Mike's command as well, is combining our abstraction information to make it a more complete picture. What you can see on the slide there is what we have in PG, and on the left-hand side are those ad hoc abstractions that neighbourhood officers are recording themselves. And I think that neighbourhood officers have felt the ability to feel valued in that space because they can show when they are being taken away from things, and that can be far better managed. On the right hand side is our planned abstraction profile, and what we're doing in the background is combining those two things together so that we can have a more complete picture, because at the minute those two things exist very separately. The one thing I would say about our planned abstraction profile is that has been a significant draw on 2P resources across the board, this is not just neighbourhood focus, but through the summer, obviously, as you'll know, Matthew, Lancer, Briar, Liberty, that has drawn a huge number of officers out into those operational areas. And what we really want to be able to see is where you are taking, as you can see on that right-hand side there, this is looking at September, but if you look back, so September was a big one for Liberty. You can see there 1,449 officers were removed from that. 1,000 of those were LCU resources. A huge number of those, would have been ICR, but what you don't see in that planned abstraction profile is what then happens to run our business as usual in the background.
Yeah.
So we have to remove officers to deal with Liberty, who is then filling those gaps in the background. So that's the work we're doing to kind of bring those profiles together to give us a far better understanding. But as Mike said, I think we've got far better sight of all of this than we've ever had before, so that we can better manage that and focus it where we need to.
And I think, I think it's really useful actually, because when we do talk about abstractions, there are quite rightly been a focus on neighbourhood officers, and I think that is most important for me, but I think it's important to recognise the impact this has on the organisation more broadly in terms of the abstraction to ICR doing other things and the knock-on that it has. I mean, the neighbourhood clearly matters more in terms of, well, day to day, it's those long-term problem solving. So you want someone who knows, I was dealing with this victim last week, we've got this particular problem and I know who to go and speak to. ICR is much more likely to just be what's come on the radio and I go and deal with that. So I don't want to do down their incredibly hard work, but by the nature of it, it's much more responsive. So I think it's useful to see the balance in this. And again, I think very different those planned abstractions from what we were seeing a couple of years ago, which wasn't. Some of them were planned because you might have, here's a period you need to go and help with RCR for 3 months, but not planned in the same way of a force-wide event that needs a level of cover. That was just managing the resources.
Yeah, we're definitely still seeing those kind of informal obstructions on an LCU level. But what matters is we can now, because of the app and that data and the coming together of the two data sets, we have a much better understanding of what those obstructions are, who's being obstructed, when they're being obstructed, so that we can actually make some informed decisions in relation to that and try and reduce it further, which is going to become even more important going forward because we are going to have to return data on our obstruction levels.
Yeah.
And we're also, because we now have to advertise all of our meetings and events online, obviously when we can't make those, that can then impact on trust and confidence if we get there.
I'll try and come back to, I know you've got some stats on that later, so I will come back to on what's mentioned that. I guess from an operational perspective, I'm just interested. So that cover at the moment, probably usually for ICR on LCU, that decision making, on the day start shift, we're short of people, you're off neighbourhood, do response, will always be there at some point. But do we have consistency in how that's applied, i.e., you've got your minimum numbers for each area. If you're below minimum numbers, we're going to take people off neighbourhood to get to the minimum, or are there supervisors who might take a different approach and say, well, we're approaching minimum numbers, and I want a little bit more flesh on the bone today, so I'm going to move people over, because that, it's a very operational decision. It's not for me to say, but you've got a minimum for a reason. And actually, if you're at minimum, you should be able to cope. Otherwise, your minimum's set in the wrong place. And if you're moving people when you're not at minimum, that suggests you're not valuing the work the neighbourhood are doing. Say, well, actually, they're almost a spare resource just to fluff it up. And is there a view on that? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it was an example of that at Force DMM only this morning, at a force level, where a lot happening in one part of the force, scene guards, couple of events over the course of the weekend that had sort of longer tails on, and there were those sorts of conversations around okay for now, but just flagging potential. So I think there was the scope now, obviously, with the LCUs to manage that far more effectively. But of course, operational policing would always mean that, as you've said, Matthew, there will be occasion where you've got scene guards, you've got cell watches, you've got those things which just do need to be managed in the moment, and they happen obviously very dynamically. But unless Mike do come in, I'm not sure there's the sort of evidence to say that people are doing that ineffectively or too proactively, if you like, because, like I say, those minimums are there for a reason. And of course, ICR can kind of blend then across the wider LCU to sort of help manage that in a much more effective way now.
Yeah, but what your data could show potentially, Mike, if you've got pockets of abstraction that are greater than others, it could either identify an area which is consistently under-resourced for ICR, or if you look at the numbers and say, well, they're not under-resourced, you may have a supervisor who's taking a view that I just want more people doing ICR than I'm being given.
Yeah.
But the data would be there to show whether that's the case or not.
Yeah, the data would be there, and I know that John has recently been working with Alex Ash to do a piece of work around how we more consistently apply the traffic light model they have on LCUs, so that they are making use of other resources, not just neighbourhood each time because they're the easiest resource, but actually making sure that we're making better use of all the resources.
Yeah, and that's looking into a piece of work that my team have led, and we just put into the 5 LCUs to test now, which is at the start of every shift, the LCUs individually will put into their DMM chat who they've got on, what their resourcing picture looks like, but also what the demand in front of them looks like, how many bed watches, cell watches. So what you get then in a really clear way is this is what you have on paper in terms of the people that we know are meant to be on shift, the establishment level and your minimums. This is who you actually have at the start of your shift to be able to respond to what's in front of you, because you have all of these resources taken for various different pieces of demand. That was being done everywhere, but in 5 different ways. So what we've done is if we've put together a centralized process for that they can fill in an MS form that is exactly the same for everybody. That's dropped automatically into their DMM chat. So it's actually far quicker for the LCUs to do. But the crucial part of that is that we then have a central repository for that information every day. And what we did in the Buckinghamshire assurance visit is we looked at that DMM chat, but we had to draw it out manually from that DMM chat every day. So have a look at that profile, and you could then track your minimum line, your resourcing line, but then also the reality of what your resourcing looked like every day. And that was really impactful. It helped us make some resourcing decisions in Bucks, didn't it? When we had that AV. So that's what we're going to now generate every day. And what Service Improvement can do with that now is we can just generate that in Performance Insight that ticks through every day and gets updated. So combine that with the abstraction information, we can see if LCUs are making different decisions about that resourcing every day. So that's coming, and we'll be able to draw up that information fairly quickly once it goes live across all LCUs, because it will just tick every day and we can then draw that profile into PG.
So I think in terms of engagement, I think we're in a pretty good place, and we're certainly in a much better place than we were 12, 18 months ago. We now have an engagement plan which is force-wide that each of the LCUs will adopt. This year, that focuses very much on seldom heard communities, retail communities and victims of ASB. And we now have a performance framework in place where each of the LCUs will do neighbourhood checks with their neighbourhood policing teams, which we've worked with the 5 chief inspectors to create and make sure it aligns with the performance framework around the neighbourhood policing guarantee. And the neighbourhood app has allowed us to have much better oversight and understanding of what our teams are doing. So we can now see what engagement they're doing, we can see who they're doing it with, we can see where they're doing it, who's doing it, who's not doing it. And we've got that kind of greater clarity of information that we can then try and really drill down into improving our engagement. So if for example, have your say meetings, very rarely attended, we can see from the data, actually, you probably need to move that to a different location where there's higher footfall and you're going to get greater coverage. So we have the ability now to do that, which we didn't have previously. That means we're much more targeted with our resources. Mm-hmm. Those health checks are allowing them to really drill into that data to make sure that they are getting the best out of their teams that they can do for the time that they have them. Also, where it came into its own is, for example, after we had the riots last year, we were able to quickly update the app with additional drop downs, which then allowed us to capture really detailed information around what our response was. So we could start to see what engagement work and visibility work we were doing around that particular demand, but also any other critical incidents or major incidents. It can really help us to look at what we're doing. And the neighbourhood app itself is we're currently working with the Home Office. They want to adopt something similar, possibly based on our app, nationally as a national asset that all forces then feed into. In terms of your area pages, which you've got up on the screen now, so we've now got a national toolkit that was introduced by the Home Office. We've also got a Thames Valley policing dashboard that we can look at, which is the one that you've got in front of you there, which gives us the heads up when we have priorities that are expiring or meetings aren't updated on the your area pages. So it allows us to quickly be able to make sure that we are compliant and make sure that we're not going to become uncompliant in the next 2 weeks. At the moment, we're looking pretty good. The only one which is slightly down, which you can see on there, which is in relation to the 72-hour pledge. We're not yet being held to account for that. We don't have to provide returns on the pledge currently. We are likely to in the future, but we do have a new 72-hour app that is kind of leading the way nationally. Nobody else has got it nationally. They are currently in the process of working with an officer from my team to introduce that to all other forces, because it is a really good way of making sure that you can comply with that 72-hour pledge and make sure that we've got the all of the information we need to then feed that to the Home Office on how our compliance looks. You have to be 100% across the board to be compliant, which is
so 98% is not bad.
yes, it's not bad. And that was actually a couple of glitches with the app, as opposed to officers not doing the 72-hour pledge. That was actually the app.
So is there I think it's dip checking. I don't know who would do it. So I think this is really good, and I think broadly speaking, you know, the 72-hour response time is a good thing. And I know it's supposed to be a meaningful response.
Yeah.
But presumably, I'm not suggesting anybody would be gaming it, but what we're measuring is timeliness, because you can measure timeliness. So actually, if someone on the neighbourhood team makes sure they respond within 72 hours, but just says, yeah, thanks for that, we'll get back to you at some point, which isn't meaningful in terms of what's meant. We don't know that. Is there any? How do we know that it is a good, meaningful response without checking everybody's homework? Because I don't. So that part of the challenge of this is giving your officers the view that nobody trusts them, and that's not my intent. But it's making sure it is actually meaningful, which is supposed to be.
So that is the beauty of the app that's Angela's created, because instead of officers replying from email or from their central inbox for their team, everything goes through the new app. So all of the responses are logged. We can see all of the responses. We can also see all of the follow-up responses as long as they go through this particular app, which means that my team are dip checking not only compliance levels, but also the actual quality of the information in there. And they will also go in and reply where they think we're going to exceed the time limit. They will actually, my team will go in and just provide that meaningful response and then get hold of the officers so that we are always compliant. So we can do that. I suppose the bit of work that we now have to do is to make sure that the work that sits behind this dashboard is going on and is meaningful, which is the priority setting, making sure that we're engaging, identifying local priorities for our communities under each of the neighbourhoods, making sure that we're then tackling those issues. And that's the kind of bit of work that we're now working on to make sure that every area's got consistent processes in place.
Good. In terms of the neighbourhood meetings, and I've noticed a massive increase in these. I think it's really positive. There's probably a small comms point in terms of consistency of how they're shared and how they look and stuff. But probably not for now. Thinking about the data here, I'm looking at the dashboard. I mean, some really good stuff. But how you touched on it yourself, are we measuring those meetings that actually go ahead? The vast majority of cases they do, but we all know there are circumstances where they don't. And I've been to some that haven't happened, and I've certainly heard lots of councillors or people say, well, I turned up so and so, there's nobody there. Probably more damaging than not doing one in the first place. And we know there'll be cases where that happens, but are we measuring that at all?
So that is measured through the app. So if an officer is abstracted, they should be putting that within the app, and within the app I can then drill down into the detail, which I did with Mike Lernberg a little while ago, to actually show him how many had been not met, or how many meetings they'd been cancelled from, or they had not been able to attend as a result of being abstracted. So we capture that through the app. That relies on obviously officers putting those abstraction with those.
Presumably, it's also going to the quality of the data. If you've got two PCSOs who are going to be going and doing one meeting, and one of them gets abstracted, well, the meeting can still go ahead.
Yeah.
But if you get both of them, then suddenly you've got no person. So it's just how we measure. There may not be an easy way of doing it, but which of these are actually happening? I'm sure the vast majority are, but I just think it's.
And again, John has been working with Alex to look at a way to protect those officers that have the meetings, because at the moment we can't put it onto DMS.
Right.
But we still need to protect them. So they've been working on a method to make sure that the DMM has visibility of those officers that have publicised meetings that they need to attend, because I think the chief previously said he didn't want us to not turn up or just not attend those meetings. It was important we got there. So they are looking at how they can still be protected without running it through the DMS system.
That performance data, Mike, does that report through from John through to Christian's local policing group?
Yeah.
Because that thing like police from that, isn't it? To your actually delivering what we say we're going to propose to deliver, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're still on neighbourhood things. I've got the details of number of specials we have. We have 180.
180.
180.
Thank you.
And you're going to ask how many we had last year.
I am.
I don't have that number. And the person, I've already asked for that number, and they can't get that detail as quickly as they could get the first number. So I thought.
Well, it is from memory. I think it was for about 120, 150. But my memory may be wrong.
I'm just going to check the minutes of the last committee.
Definitely helped over the longer term.
Yeah.
We know that.
180, so I'm told.
Yeah.
So.
So 2.5 times as many would be good. Yeah. Okay. But it is encouraging to see that more in the recruitment pipeline, and I think that I think they'll be talking to Jason, Chief Special Jason, not Chief Constable Jason. There had been, I think, a bit of a lull in recruitment, and of course going through Sully partly, a bit of a COVID lag still, prioritisation being given to getting regulars through. So I think just having more courses and more availability should start to get us there.
So I have a tactical workforce planning meeting where we talk about all courses at that kind of minutiae level, and making sure that we don't do things like that. We'll always have the challenge between putting on a course with few numbers and making it cost effective and work for everybody versus are wanting to get people come through. What's really clear as well, people who are coming to these specials, they won't then do things over the summer, they won't do things over Easter and Christmas and stuff like that. So we have to approach it in a slightly different way, but I'm really mindful of that.
And they do need a little bit more TLC as well, because they're volunteers who are coming in and doing the organisation favour, whereas you can, if you want to look after your new recruits, but you can chop and change them around a little bit more, and
definitely
they're getting paid to be there.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, lovely. Thank you both very much for that. That was really helpful. Some good stuff there, especially around the the headline numbers on neighbourhood. You're right, Mike, are definitely making a big difference. And we've gone from when Jason started as chief, we talked about doubling neighbourhood, and I remember at the time that was a bit of a challenge for people to double. We were about 150 to 300. We're almost travelling where we were now, depending on how many over we go by the end of the year, we'll be much closer to that. So really good position, and good to see the scrutiny of the work they're doing as well. So very helpful. Thank you both. I think the next bit is the next slides we're on to the 999 call answering and instant response times. So
this first slide shows the profile of those aims that we set at the start of the year for our call handling profile. I wanted to ensure 90% of 999 calls were answered within 10 seconds, achieve an average 101 call answer time of 4 minutes or lower across the whole year, and then finally reducing the negative abandonment rate for 101 calls. The reason there's not a numeric target around that abandonment rate for 101 calls is if we achieve second aim within there, the last aim there follows. So there's a direct correlation between those two things, you'd expect. Really positive performance in all three of these spaces this year. So our 999 service level is currently at 94.8%. That's a 2 percentage improvement on, well, actually a little bit more than 2 percentage point improvement on where we started the year. So even with that significant uptick on the target, we've actually improved through the year. The 101 profile is much lower in terms of that average wait time than we were expecting this year, which is a real positive. When I was speaking with our leads for contact management at the start of this year, we set what we felt was an ambitious target. And Matthew will remember when we've been in this room in previous years talking about an aim of getting us under 5 minutes, because we were really struggling, as you can see, you know, when you look further back on that chart at the bottom. But the combination of excellent recruitment, being able to retain people in the contact management space and keeping on top of that recruitment pipeline, and efficiencies with the 101 programme have really come to fruition. And the abandonment rate has reduced significantly, as you can see there as well, down to 10.6% for 101s. So the next slide goes into a little bit
just on that. So one, I think you're probably expecting, because Rachel will probably have primed you. I don't think we've got data in here, but if we get outside the meeting, I'm really interested in the data post the 10 seconds. So 94.8% within 10 seconds, it's over the target. That's really good.
Yeah.
But I know it doesn't mean this, but does that mean that 5.2% of people are then waiting a minute to have their calls answered? Because actually, if the next 3% are only waiting 11 seconds, then I'm really comfortable with that. But so it's understanding what the profile is, probably not quite second by second, but in small increments in terms of that. I will make 2 comments on 101. It's not subject to this, so I don't expect, you know, they're not questions with answers, they're just sort of observations.
Yeah.
But whilst the slides are here, and 101 is the bit that causes the angst for the public, that's where the volume stuff comes in, obviously. Firstly, really impressive performance on 101. It has gone incredibly well. I know I talked to Jason about some of the over recruitment. There's a whole lot of stuff there. Clearly, we need to try and maintain that performance at a time when there are plenty of challenges around workforce and all the other financial pressures where we can make savings. From my perspective, obviously the strategic plan is to the full, but I will certainly be expecting a better than 4-minute target in the future. If we can get it to just over 2 minutes, I'd be saying the stretch target should be let's aim for 2 minutes, or at least let's lower the 4 minutes to 2.5. So because the risk is, if you look at this, if you've got contact management under the cosh, if we have savings to make, then the simple thing is to deliberately underperform here, because you say, well, we could nearly double the length of our average course and we'd still be within target, and that's probably not what the target is intended to be. 4 minutes was a stretch target, and I think the performance is really good. We need to look at the target going forward. And the other bit, similar to my point on 999, at some point I'd be really interested to see the data for the 11,000 calls waiting more than 2 minutes broken down, because again, if 10,000 of that 11,000 are answered between 10 minutes and 10 minutes and 59 seconds, probably not that big a deal. If 10,000 of those 11,000 are waiting for 45 minutes before they get answers, then we've got a problem we need to deal with. And of course, neither of those are true. But it would just be really interesting to see the profile outside of this meeting, or perhaps we do it as a future deep dive, but just get into that minutiae to understand it a little bit more.
That's absolutely fine, Matthew. Yeah, so actually the Pareto chart on the top right of that display there shows you the 101 profile for that, broken down in minute by minute chunks.
Yeah, it's that last chunk at the end.
And yes, and that last chunk, I think the important thing to reflect on that one is, because you are looking at everything over 10 minutes, your chunk is going to look much larger. But we can break that down second by second and give you that profile. There's no problem at all. We can do that. And then the same applies
second by second.
Sure, I won't go into that granular detail. But I suppose for the nines, that is more.
Yes, yeah, I mean that probably is second by second.
And within service improvement portal, and this is something that Matt and Simon within the contact management space keep on top of regularly in their performance meetings. Those Pareto profiles are also available for them every single day. So for the nines, for example, I can say, because I've got it up on the screen for you, is that all nines are answered within 50 seconds. So you get to 100% when you get to that point currently. There are 97% of 9s are answered within 20 seconds. So we've got that breakdown, and we can give you that after the meeting. That's no problem at all. So if you're content, Matthew, I'll move us on one slide, and this just gives you a bit of a more detailed breakdown into that 9 profile. So you wanted to have a bit more detail around the 9s. Again, this is all information that's available for us regularly through our service improvement boards and updates every single day. But you can see here that this is some profiles against last year, and what we've been able to see here is our improvement in that service level against that level that we were seeing last year. Finished last year a bit above that 88%, but year to date, we were at 88%. So it's the same profile as we were this year. If we continue our strong performance this year, we should outstrip that. And again, the same profile with the 101s. We'll always reflect on that target to understand whether or not we're approaching at the start of the year, and obviously we've done very well. So we'll review that again for next year's strategic plan. If you look at the next slide, they go on to incident response. So I want to pause there before, if you've got any more questions.
So I think it's really helpful to look at the 9s, because clearly that's the start of that process for the urgent stuff. I have to say, I think that the figures are in a really good place. I think the headline performance of the time to answer is really good. Seeing that nuance in the 10 seconds to 50 seconds will be good, but actually, again, reassuring that 50 seconds is the outlier, if you like. So that's I think a really good place to be. The focus in contact management, like I said, is much more around 101 than some of the digital, because that's where we get the volumes, and people are generally quite comfortable with the 9s. But actually, the main point of this discussion is about the instant response of getting the vehicles, the people out there as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. Well, if you move to the next slide, Rachel, thank you. So this is our profile so far with incident response. We set the aim of increasing our grade 1 attendance to 70% within 20 minutes, and we're at 68.4% currently year to date. And the grade 2s to improve those that we attended under 60 minutes to 60%. Last year, this is an example of our current approach to strategic planning for our performance aims. Last year, we didn't have a numeric figure for how many grade 2s we wanted to get to within that 60-minute mark. That was very intentional, because we were changing significantly the profile of our grade 2s and how we were grading in that space. And again, we've talked about that previously. I wanted to set a numeric target for that this year to sharpen our focus now that we had those system changes in place. So you can see the top right table there gives you a profile month on month, and we always look at this with a kind of 3-month snapshot in PG, but this rolls through the year of where our performance sits. And you can see there that our grade 1 performance struggled a little in July with quite significant abstractions. August was a little better. September plateaued a little, although slightly down in August. Our grade 2s, again, struggling in July with that profile of abstraction, but we then rebounded a little to get to 56 and 55% respectively. The challenge for us in that space is improving our culture, improving our processes around that grade 2 area in particular. We have been able to maintain a level of performance with grade 1s, albeit below that 70% mark, despite quite significant volume uptick in the number of grade 1s that we are actually going to. And obviously that has a significant impact on our resourcing picture, because you have such a short amount of time to get to them. And if they increase by 2,000, which they have done this year, that was quite a strain on our LCUs. So expecting that performance figure to stay fairly stable is what I would expect with that uptick in demand. The converse is true of grade 2s, but the reason for that is because of that grading decision. So you're still seeing the impact of that grading decision year on year when you compare those numbers. We are grading fewer at grade 2 intentionally with more discernment. Some of that is going down into your grade 3 profile, and you can see there the uptick in volume, but also some of that will be heading upwards into the grade 1. There will be a cultural element to that when a contact management staff member is thinking, should this be an immediate attendance? Should this be an urgent attendance? There is a natural inclination to go up into the grade 1s, as well as potentially to remove the less urgent elements for grade 2 down into grade 3. So there will be a slight offset there. If you go on to the next slide, Rachel, this gives a bit more of a detailed deep dive into that attendance profile for both gradings. So the top table there looks at that uptick in our attendance profile. And what you can see here, I mentioned an uptick of demand for grade ones of almost 2,000. If you look at the numbers on the right-hand side of that table in the top, what you can see is actually we've gone to almost, well, it's over 4,500 more grade ones within target this year than we did last year. And the reason for that is twofold. One, we are going to more because of that demand uptick, and that's a real uptick in terms of demand. And two, we have gotten much, much better at accurately recording our response profile. So what we did last year, and we moved it into this year, is reduce the number of calls that we were just showing as not attended at all, because we weren't either 0-6ing, or in the background there was a systemic problem in the contact centre space, the CMP space, where we were doing it, but it wasn't filtering through and being recorded. So we've gotten much better at that discipline, and we can see clearly what our performance looks like now. On the grade twos, you can see here that our SLA has gone from 47% within an hour to 53%, but that equates to we've gone to 64 more grade twos on target this year than we did last year. The volume of those that are attended have gone down because of that change in grading profile and the uptick in grade ones. What I've really focused on, and the DEP will attest to, the thing that I speak about all the time in Force PG, is making sure that all of our LCUs get into the positive numbers in terms of those grade twos attended on target, which is at that far right hand side. That's really where we want to be. Our SLA is improving, and that is good because we are being more discerning about the grade twos we're going to, but we want to improve that total volume as well. Now that we're out of that profile where we're changing our structures and our decision making, let's drive that improvement. One of the core things within that profile is the difference between DA and non-DA within our grade 2 attendance times. You can see there at the bottom, thank you Rachel, our attendance for non-DA grade 2s is much better, and actually close to that 60% mark that we established, and our attendance for the DA is much worse. If you go to the next slide, Rachel, there's an analysis by exception profile that we brought into PG for this. And the reason we brought this in is because that may feel like quite a bleak picture, that difference. However, we are seeing in Milton Keynes a real move to be able to improve that profile quite significantly. Milton Keynes is the LCU that's commanded by Emma Bailey. Emma leads on our attendance profile for the whole force, obviously is very engaged in that space, but they have got a number of really positive practices in place in Milton Keynes that we need to try and proliferate across the other 5 LCUs. And this was one of the reasons we wanted to bring this profile in, because yes, their DA grade 2 profile is not as good as their non-DA, but you can see their significant improvement in the light blue line or the turquoise line in that top right. That's Milton Keynes, and you can see they are ticking up towards 50% and above that actually in September for their DA grade 2 attendance, which is a really significant uptick in an area that we've always found very challenging. So work to do on the grade 2s, there's no doubt about it, and it's a very focused area of conversation in Force PG regularly, but there are green shoots that we can do this well in certain areas of TVP. We just need to make sure that we are doing it well in other areas. And then the last thing I'll say about that is the challenge for TVP, and it always will be, is that difference in geography, difference in structure. Milton Keynes is one profile. It is a very different profile to Oxfordshire or Bucks, for example. So we need to make sure that when we're trying to draw that positive practice, we do it in a way that functions for those larger areas as well.
Yeah. Yes, that's what I was. So I'm having a little delve in what we're talking. I appreciate there's a huge amount of data.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at it at the performance level, how much does that geography take? Or sorry, a better question is probably what's the underlying issue? Is there one single thing that would be the silver bullet if it could be fixed around attendance? Because there's lots of progress being made. I don't want to do that down, but also failing on each one of the attendance targets for whatever grade it is, despite having changed some of the grading, none of those are on target. So is it about the control room process, how quick to dispatch? Is it about the cultural elements that might still remain of how quickly officers will deploy themselves and then they will by someone else? But actually I'm going to finish what I'm doing before I go, because I don't think that job is as quite as important as the control room is telling me. Much more difficult to deal with, but will be a real issue. Travel times, which I think is a really big bit of it, and that's what I'm looking at the moment. Yeah, some big differences in terms of travel times depending on the geography of the force, obviously. And then you've got the, well, I'm actually telling everybody I've arrived bit at the end of that. Those, to my mind, are sort of the 4 elements of it. And are there any consistencies in terms of this data that says actually we're comfortable with how quickly the control room are doing it? We know we've got a bit of a cultural issue, but it's not that massive. The biggest thing that's stopping us getting there in 20 minutes is the geography. That everybody's just taking out a little bit longer to drive there. Do we know is there a single thread that runs through it all?
So there's not one silver bullet. That's my opinion. What I would say is that your framing of those kind of 4 areas, I would agree with in the main, Matthew. They are our areas of challenge. What we are able to do now, in a way that we've never been able to do before, is identify which elements of those are contributing to our attendance and in what ways. So
it's different in different areas.
And it's different in different areas. We're able to discern that. Yeah. So the geography in Oxfordshire, for example, will always be a challenge. And again, there's different profiles within that. So within Oxford itself, you have a difficulty in your road structure and the amount of traffic and the amount of roadworks. Within the Southern Vale portion of Oxfordshire, you are dealing with a very different profile. It's distance. That's your issue, and road network quality. The thing that I think we're doing well in PG at the minute is driving particular operational focuses to try and address each of those areas. So our key area for culture is in the dispatch, and I've been very clear in my messaging around this. That's not a contact management problem. That's a contact management and local policing problem. Those 2 things are intrinsically linked, and dispatch time is both of those functions' responsibility. And we've got the contact management and local policing gold group that runs now collectively, and I've seen far better collective working between those functions to try and address those problems. Some of it is in that relationship between the control rooms and the local policing resourcing sergeants. And again, we've been able to do real focus work on what is that resourcing sergeant doing, and is that role working in the way it should be. A really great example is the Oxfordshire AV that we've just gone into. We identified that the resourcing sergeant kind of profile structure the Oxfordshire had was just not working well enough to try and address that. So they are doing something different with that now. These are the screens that we put in for ICR rooms. Again, that's a key differentiator between Milton Keynes and lots of other areas. They are using the screens that we've got in their ICR rooms to drive response in a much more proactive way than lots of other areas of the force. And we've been able to draw that out from our assurance visit process. So we're being more directive about that. That should help that dispatch profile. The travel time is more challenging for us. And one of the key ways that we could get around that is the use of our response equipment for grade 2s. That's something that officers we know are reticent to do because they are worried about the potential liability that they would hold, or the risk that they would hold if they used 3s and 2s to get to a job for grade 2 and something went wrong within that travel. We are again re-spinning the message around that to try and give officers assurance that they will be supported by the force to use those that equipment if they need to. So it's not one thing, unfortunately. If it was, my life would be much easier. If PG's kind of draw people.
I'm just looking at the sort of grade 1 travel times, according to there are 8 minutes as an average for the force. Except that's an average. If you're down in Henley, it's about 21 minutes, and there'll be others. But even if you took the biggest outlier average, which is 13 minutes to include the motorway attendance, I think as a layman, you would think, well, you're 20 minutes to respond to a grade 1. That's getting someone from A to B. That's what this is all about, isn't it? How quickly you get someone from A to B. Actually, 13 minutes of your 20 is the average, often a lot lower. Even if we say 13 minutes, then actually that gives you 7 minutes to get someone at that. That's the bit that 7 minutes is not a long time, but in an emergency response, that's the bit that feels like that's where the challenge is, not the travel time is the problem. There will be issues around that. I mean, where I do think we do need to think about travel time is, and where it becomes as partly my problem as well as your problem, is when we're in seg and we're looking at where we're putting our bases and also where we're putting custody in terms of how long people are going to be trapping into custody, etc. And I know there is a lot of work that goes into that.
All that modelling, absolutely.
We discussed it, but that is really critical, and that's why I'm nervous sometimes about our neighbourhood bases and maybe our more distant response bases. Clearly, we don't want them if they're not being used. But actually, maybe we need to be a bit more directive to push people into those areas that, if the average is 8 minutes, and I could look through there and say, well, there are neighbourhoods which still have a reasonable volume of calls, but their average travel times are 15, 18, 20 minutes, then actually there needs to be some resource closer to them patrolling those areas to respond more quickly.
Yeah, and this is where some of the cultural aspects that Matty talked about do play out as well. There is no need for the vast majority of officers to have to return to a particular policing base for the vast majority of their shift, unless they've got a prisoner, for example, they go into custody. They've got the cool tools, the kit and equipment to be able to do that indefinitely. And you speak to particularly officers who are incredibly digitally aware, and they will stop at a particularly convenient point where they know the vast majority of the grade 1s or 2s are going to be, and they will update the latest, the last job before they move back. And others will seek to have to return to base, and there might be other reasons to need to as well, of course. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the use of the grade 2s for emergency warning equipment, for example, in some parts of the organisation, Milton Keynes particularly, you speak to officers there, they don't really do it. And they don't really need to because of the geography. In other places like Oxfordshire, Henley, and the like, and elsewhere, it's going to be fundamental. We're never going to hit the target unless people are confident to use those the kit and equipment appropriately. So there is lots for us to do.
There is, and I think on that cultural piece around the dispatch time. So you talk about that 7 minutes, Matthew. I think that's the crucial time for our contact function and our local policing function to be working together really efficiently, and for us to try and articulate out as much of that cultural element as we possibly can. And we're asking this at a time when the force is going through significant change, because if we are going to respond effectively, we need to respond in a different manner now that we are 5 LCUs than we used to as 12 LPAs. And that's some of the work that we've done through the assurance visits to try and drive home that point. And that's why radar exists, really, because what you need to do if you're going to get to these calls on time is resource an area as large as Oxfordshire in a different way than you used to resource the 3 LPAs that formed that LCU, because you need your resources to be more flexible between those 3 different areas. And that's one of the things that I think is taking more time for us and is a cultural kind of path that we need to tread, and those cultural elements of getting out of the station quickly, not worrying about where you are typically based and going back to your station, or being overly anxious about resourcing another area in inverted commas, even though that is now your area. Those are the things that take longer for us to try and embed, and we are seeing that process take some time, I think.
Yeah, I think the LCU maturity point is a really key one. And when we track sort of now Milton Keynes and Bucks performance compared with some of the others, you can see things that they are attending to now in broad terms and really trying to problem solve some of the challenges like this are in a completely different and more mature space than they were a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think, like Matty says, using the really great and particularly kind of local policing and contact management interaction and integration at an operational level is almost the X factor, isn't it? That's the thing that's really making the difference.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you. So, managing force performance and Moto, how confident are you around those targets? I mean, whilst I made the point we're not there yet. 69% to 70% is not a million miles away. In fact, it's improved because I'm now looking at the live SIP and it's 0.6% better than it was when this was done for the report. So keep going like that, you're fine. But I guess this is for the full year. We're halfway through the year. How confident are you about achieving that, given some of those iterative, and I know there is no magic bullet, but those iterative interventions that we talked about, the grade 1 is the priority, but then grade 2 is much further off, partly because of maybe some of the changes in the grading that have been talked about. But where do you think the force is in terms of achieving those?
So we've hit grade 1 70% in 1 month in this last performance year only, and of course everything else then drags us south of that, doesn't it? So I am confident that we will achieve the 70% in consecutive months. Whether that will bring our average year to date and then full year up 70%. I think we could be in the 60, frustratingly in the 69s. I think the grade 2s, as you said, is more challenging. That is taking us longer to work through some of the multiple factors in all of the LCUs in a consistent way, and delivering that, in reality in this year is going to be challenging. So for me, and we talk about this all the time, and PJ, this is about continual performance improvement. If we we've got a stretching target, we want to hit it. If we do not hit it, we want to make sure that we are consistently improving, so that as early as we can in the next performance year, we are really on it. So I'm just being completely open that is going to be challenging for the grade 2 particularly.
And looking at those grade 2s where the time is lower and it's further off target, I'm quite interested in the blue light point that you raised. I haven't looked at the stats for travel time for those, for example, but that feels like, well, you've got a much longer period of 60 minutes. That feels like the sort of thing that could actually nudge you that little bit further, which is an interesting one. But again, I don't know if that's more about the availability of the people for grade 2s, because it is less urgent, or whether it's about the travel time and what needs to be done there.
And a lot of it is in places where, like I say, geography means that there's a long distance, but there's also a lot of traffic as well. So actually, we're not talking about people going crazy. We're talking about people using it to make good progress through traffic in a very safe, effective manner. But I still think there's a driver, or perception of a driver risk element, and the organisation is trying to sort of really equip our people to do that. So I don't think it's not. I don't think it's about the numbers, and I don't think it's really about the distances per se. It's just about making sure, again, this only comes through really effective contact management, local policing working together to really streamline that sort of dispatch point to get people on the road out as quickly as possible. And there's a cultural bit here. Sometimes people want to know a bit more before they dispatch. They want to look it up, particularly in the DA profile. What's the context? What's the history? How many times we've been before? It's all important stuff, but you can get a snapshot of that on the fly. Rather than necessarily have to go into the weeds of it before you leave, in our view. So again,
but that's also, I guess, things that come out there. One is not expecting some stats, but I think a general improvement. But certainly a couple of years ago, we didn't have enough drivers trained to drive on blues, and so that's a limiting factor for 1 and 2s. So clearly improving that is another matter, I guess. And this is cultural. But I guess it is a reality of these things that how many of those officers are single or double crewed? Because if you are double crewed, your passenger can be doing some of that research as you on your 8-minute average journey to a job. Clearly, that wouldn't be safe for a driver. So if you've got someone who's single crewed, then they may well want to have a little bit for a start. They're going in the lane, so they want to have a little bit more of an understanding of what there is. So that's, I guess, another aspect.
Definitely, yes. Yeah.
And we try to give our areas far more insight into those kind of discernment calls as well. So that's what radar is able to give those areas. It's how are you structuring your incident response resources, and within your shifts, which of those are going to which jobs, and are there pockets, for example, do you have shifts where your officers are consistently not the first on scene, for example, and do you want to dig into that? So I know that's been used by LCUs proactively to make those kind of decisions. But yeah, it's a tricky kind of, it's one of those areas within TVP, especially because of the size and scale of our force. This problem is so intrinsically linked to so many different functions, and it needs the system working really, really well all the way through. So yeah, there's lots to focus in on, but we try and keep doing that.
Okay. Thank you. I'm conscious of
we're a tiny bit over a minute.
Just that's fine. We will whiz through some of the latter bits. I've got some points there. I'll bring up an area thinking about future meetings. I think that's helpful. Obviously, we'll look at it through the ongoing force performance in terms of those percentages. But it's worth having that point. Thank you very much for that, Matthew. So we have police force fit for the future. This was going to be a verbal update, Ben, given that I've only left us with 5 minutes and we did debate at the start. Should we carry that over to the next meeting for a fuller discussion? Should we carry that over to the next meeting?
We've got a presentation. We can list it for January.
Yes, lovely. Thank you.
Operational highlights, we've got separately the force performance pack circulated, so we've seen that and noted that progress. So is there anything in particular you
In
want to
particular, by
raise?
exception, Matthew.
No, okay, that's fine, thank you. Inspections and audits. I do apologise, we kept you
That's
here.
okay.
Once. And then I'll give you 4 minutes at the end.
Last but not least.
Yes, absolutely. So for anyone online, Ali Nichols, Head of Strategic Governance. So I think, yeah, without wishing to kind of very briefly bog down with process, we've actually not really had brilliant visibility of our audit and recommendations. So I think the data that we have in front of us is a really a good piece of work that the team have been doing with Neil and Amy to get visibility of them and share the visibility so that we can have more central kind of oversight of progress. In terms of force governance and oversight, we've got the DEPS risk improvement and learning meeting. So we will bring this information and any sort of audits that are either looking to be overdue to then bring in and provide some assurance. There is still work ongoing to make sure there's that consistent kind of governance at a more local command level. But now we've got this, that will be a lot easier. So this is this changes every single day. And so this is a snapshot of audits per chief officer at the moment. Probably pause there. I'm running out of time. Unless you have any specific questions.
No, apologies for not letting you much time, but I think this is really useful. This is a vast improvement in terms of where we were in terms of visibility.
Yes.
So lots of those conversations that are going on behind the scenes, but actually understanding what is where and how that progress is happening. Probably a little bit more we can do as this develops over time, but
Yes,
this is definitely a significant improvement of where we are. And I know, Rachel, you were saying the audit team really pleased with that change in process and how those things are being carried forward.
The next slide was just, talking about what we've introduced. So we'll skip over that. I think the final slide is in relation to HMIC. So similarly, we've got the fourth level governance at the DEPS risk improvement and learning meeting. And so on the left hand side, you've got the Peel AFIs and recommendations and the progress. So green is the ones that we've completed. Purple or grey, I think it is. Those are the ones that we are self-certified on, and the 6 left open. I think it's fair to say, as you know, we're undergoing our ongoing assessment for Peel. Many of those won't be closed until the end of that assessment period anyway, but there is some good progress on those.
And the one cause concern that remains.
That relates to custody, and there has been a re-inspection or a revisit, and they've already talked about the fact that that's going to be closed down.
That was my expectation. Is that the problem with some of them, as you say, are sort of self-certified, if you like. We've been asked to do this, we've done that, tick the box. Clearly, for a cause of concern is at that level where you need HMI to come back in and say, that's it. So you've had that indication, but it's not formally. It's
not reflected on our shared portal yet. So the bit on the right is wider than Peel. It's all of our recommendations. Lots of new reports come in, so that pushes the numbers up, but that is generally supposed to show the progress and reduction over time from all the work that is going on across the force.
And I think maybe that's the key one for me. That very last bit is a really useful tracker in terms of the stuff that's being looked at by time. That's great. Thank you very much, Dee, for that. That's the end of those pieces. Thank you very much, Ali. AOB.
Nothing from me
in the last minute. So just think about the future, the next meeting. So we've got January, which will be very heavily loaded on the budget. But there are a couple of things. So the item on
technology,
you're going to look at. I think it would be worth us having a look. The relatively brief discussion about 909 was, I think, useful. Very comfortable with 909 and where we are in terms of that performance. Aside from that one little bit of data, which would just be nice to see. There's a little bit more about 101, and I think worth us having a look at 101 and digital but I'm going to suggest maybe not for the January meeting, partly because of some of the new work that contact management are doing anyway. So it will be the next quarter's PAM meeting. Can Rachel, we do something on 101 and digital. So it's not quite as wide as contact management, but looking at performance of those two areas, and it really touches quite well with some of those tech points, because things like the chatbot, etc., they won't be in place to affect performance there, but actually it would be useful to look at where's our current non-emergency performance on both of those areas, and then what are some of the technical possibilities that are coming through. One other area I think it would be useful to look at in the future, which could be January if we do it relatively briefly. Says he who's dragged this one out for a long time. We've just done the grade 1 attendance. Within that, of course, there's a specific target about attendance for domestic burglary, which I forget what the actual target is, 85%.
100% attendance.
100% attendance.
Yes, but sorry, target is 100%, but I'm trying to think what current figure within.
Well, yeah, this is part of the challenge we've got, isn't it? We won't go into that.
Right,
But it's just whether or not we're recording it.
yes, so I think that was, if we do that one in January,
Okay.
that we have a particular look at, so sort of on the back of this, let's look at the burglary attendance
Yes.
specifically, and then for the next one, we'll do 101 digital contact. Okay, good stuff. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you for those joining online.
Thanks, Mike.